What if, in just a few hours, your whole life fell apart? Your family, dead. Your servants, gone. Your skin slowly peeling off. And your closest friends all put the blame on you. Then, when you cry out to God for answers, a terrifying whirlwind rises as he speaks of enormous beasts, Behemoth, and the terrifying Leviathan. After losing almost everything, would you still trust God? Long before there were kings ruling over Israel, in a land called Uz, there lived a man named Job. Job was not just wealthy, he was one of the richest men in the entire region. He owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 oxen and 500 donkeys. He also had a large staff of servants to care for them all. In that world, animals were currency, and Job's herds made him one of the most powerful men anyone knew. But wealth wasn't what made Job stand out. He was known across the land as a man who avoided evil on purpose every single day. He didn't do it because anyone forced him to. He did it because he genuinely feared God and chose to live honestly. Job had 10 children, 7 sons and 3 daughters, and the family was close. The sons took turns hosting feasts at their homes. Job loved his children so much that after each round of feasting, he would quietly get up early. He would offer sacrifices for every one of them. He did this just in case, in all the celebrating, one of them had sinned against God without even realizing it. That was the kind of man Job was. Careful and faithful. He was constantly looking out for the people he loved, even in ways they never saw him do it. Job lived among a group the Bible calls the people of the East. That term was used for wealthy families who lived in tents. They moved their herds across open land instead of settling inside walled cities. Because of that lifestyle, a man's entire fortune could be standing right outside his tent at any given moment. It was grazing, breathing, and vulnerable to weather, disease, or attack. There were no banks and no vaults, no way to lock wealth away and protect it. If something happened to the animals, it happened to everything Job owned all at once. That detail matters because it explains exactly how a man this wealthy could lose almost everything in a single day. But far away from Job's house, something was happening in the unseen world. It was about to put all of that faithfulness to the test. The Bible describes a moment where an accusing spirit stood before God. This spirit is referred to simply as the accuser, and he made a claim about Job. The claim was simple and sharp. Job only worships you because his life is easy. Take away everything he has, the accuser said, and he will curse you to your face. So permission was given to test that claim directly. Job would lose everything in a single day, and he would never be told why. It began as an ordinary afternoon. Nothing about the morning had felt any different from 100 mornings before it. Job's servants had gone out at first light the way they always did. They led the animals to graze and checked on the flocks scattered across the hills. They were settling in for a long, uneventful day of work. Job's oxen were plowing in the field, and his donkeys were grazing beside them when a raiding group called the Sabaeans attacked without warning. They killed the servants guarding the animals and drove off every ox and donkey Job owned. Only one servant escaped, and he ran the whole way back to Job's house, arriving out of breath. He delivered the news as fast as he could. Raiders had struck, the animals were gone, and every other servant with him was dead. The first messenger was still standing there, catching his breath, when a second one came running in from a completely different direction. This one hadn't come from the fields, but from the hills where Job kept his sheep. Fire fell from the sky, he said, and it burned up the sheep and the shepherds. I'm the only one who got away to tell you. Job had just lost his oxen and donkeys to raiders. Now, within minutes, his sheep, thousands of them, were gone too, along with the men who had spent their lives tending them. He didn't even have time to process that before a third messenger burst through the door. This time, it was a group called the Chaldeans. They had split into 3 separate raiding parties and stolen every one of Job's 3,000 camels, killing the servants guarding them in the process. 3 disasters, 3 messengers, all arriving within what felt like minutes of each other. Job had now lost his oxen, his donkeys, his sheep, and his camels, nearly his entire fortune. Dozens of his servants were dead as well. But the worst news of the day hadn't come yet. A 4th messenger arrived, while the 3rd one was still speaking. He was out of breath in a way that seemed different from the others. It wasn't from running as far, but from what he had just seen. It wasn't about animals or stolen property. Job's sons and daughters had been together at the oldest brother's house, feasting the way they always did.
Want your children to learn Bible verses without giving them more screen time?
Instead of endless scrolling, your kids can color, play, and have fun while growing closer to God and learning His Word. Over 70 pages filled with exciting Bible challenges. And if your kids sometimes get bored during church, bring the book along and give them something fun to do. You can check out the book using the link below. Available now on Amazon.
A massive windstorm swept in from the desert. It slammed into the house and collapsed it on top of everyone inside. All 10 of Job's children were dead. Job stood there and absorbed all 4 reports back to back, his animals, his servants, and now his own children. There was no space to breathe in between any of them. 4 messengers, 4 disasters, and not one moment to process any of it before the next one arrived. Then Job did something no one watching would have expected. He stood up and tore his robe as a sign of grief. He shaved his head, which was the customary way people in that culture mourned a devastating loss. Then he lowered himself to the ground, not to collapse in despair, but to worship. "Naked I came from my mother's womb," he said, "and naked I will leave this life. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." In everything that had just happened to him, Job did not sin. He did not blame God for any of it. That should have been the end of the test, but it wasn't. Sometime later, in that same unseen world, the accusing spirit returned with a new argument. He said Job had only held on because his own body was untouched. "A man will give up everything he owns to save his own skin," the accuser said. "Take away his health, and he will curse you to your face." Permission was given a second time. This time, Job's life would be protected, but absolutely nothing else about him would be. Painful sores broke out across Job's entire body, from the bottom of his feet to the top of his head. The pain and itching were so constant that Job left his own house. He went to sit outside in a pile of ashes. That was where people in deep mourning would sit, to show how far they had fallen. He picked up a broken piece of pottery from the ground. He used the jagged edge to scrape at his own skin, just to get a moment of relief from the burning. Neighbors who once came to him for advice now walked past the ash pile without stopping. His opinion had once carried weight across the whole region. They couldn't reconcile the man sitting there with the one they remembered. The richest man in the region was now sitting outside in the dirt, scraping his own body raw in front of anyone who passed by. Days passed like this, and Job's wife stayed near him through all of it. She watched the sores spread, and the pain grow worse with no sign of relief. She had once been married to the wealthiest man in the region. Now she watched him scrape his own skin in a pile of ash outside their home. She had buried 10 children in that same short span of time. Job had lost his entire fortune too, and she had no explanation for any of it. It was there, watching him suffer day after day, that Job's wife finally spoke. She had lost her 10 children too, and she had watched her husband's health collapse in front of her without any sign of it stopping. Her patience had run out completely. Are you still holding on to your integrity? she asked him. "Curse God and die." She wasn't a villain in this story. She was a grieving mother who couldn't understand why her husband kept clinging to his faith. It hadn't protected either of them from any of this, but Job refused to give in. "You're talking like a foolish woman talks," he told her. "Should we accept only good from God and never accept hardship?" Job was at his lowest point, sitting in ashes with nothing left. Even so, he would not turn against God. That refusal was exactly what was being tested. Word of Job's suffering eventually reached 3 of his friends, men named Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. Each one came from a different region. When they heard what had happened to Job, they agreed to meet up. They would travel to him together, so none of them would have to face the visit alone. The journey to Job's home took days, and along the way, the 3 men talked quietly among themselves. They tried to understand how a man as faithful as Job could have been struck down this hard. In their culture, it was widely believed that God only allowed this level of suffering as punishment for serious, hidden sin. None of the 3 men could imagine any other explanation. When they finally caught sight of Job from a distance, they almost didn't recognize him. His body was so disfigured by disease that he looked like a completely different man than the one they remembered. The shock hit them immediately, and they began to weep and tore their own robes in grief on his behalf. They threw dust into the air over their heads, mourning as if he had already died. Then they sat down on the ground beside him. For 7 days and 7 nights, not one of them said a single word. His pain was so enormous that at first none of them could find anything worth saying. It was Job who finally broke the silence, not his friends. On the 7th day, he opened his mouth, but instead of praising God the way he had before, he cursed the day he was born. "Let the day I was born be erased," he said. "Let it be forgotten, as if it never happened at all." He wasn't cursing God directly, but he was demanding to know why he had ever been allowed to live through pain this severe. "Why didn't I die the moment I came out of the womb?" he asked. "Why is life even given to a man who is suffering the way I am?" This was the turning point of the story. The patient, worshipping Job from the very beginning, was now a broken man demanding answers. That demand was what set everything that followed into motion. That outburst was exactly what finally broke his friend's silence. Eliphaz spoke first, and his argument was simple. In his own experience, innocent people don't suffer for no reason. So if Job was suffering this badly, it had to mean he had sinned somewhere and needed to repent. Job pushed back hard, insisting he had done nothing to deserve any of it. Bildad spoke next, arguing that God does not twist justice. If Job's own children had died in that storm, it must have been because of something they themselves had done wrong. That accusation cut deeper than the first one had, striking at the memory of the 10 children Job had just buried. Job's replies grew sharper and more desperate in response. Zophar was the harshest of the 3. He told Job flatly that he was actually getting off easier than his sin deserved. Job grew increasingly frustrated, and at one point, he cried out that he wished he could bring his case directly before God. He wanted it judged like a courtroom trial, so someone impartial could decide if he deserved this. By the end of the 3rd round, Zophar had nothing left to say. The arguing simply stopped, unresolved, hanging in the air between 4 exhausted men. What was supposed to be a visit of comfort had turned into an argument. It left Job feeling more alone than before his friends had even arrived. In the middle of all this arguing, a younger man named Elihu finally spoke up. He had been sitting off to the side, listening the entire time without saying a word. He explained that he had stayed quiet out of respect for his elders since he was younger than all 4 men. But he could not hold back any longer, because he believed everyone in the conversation had gotten something wrong. His anger, he said, had been building the whole time he sat there in silence. He was angry at the three friends for condemning Job without real proof. He was also angry at Job for defending himself instead of trusting God's judgment. Job's three friends were wrong to assume that suffering always proves hidden sin. But Job was also wrong to spend so much energy demanding that God explain himself, as though God owed him a personal defense. Elihu reminded Job that God is far greater than any human being. He said, suffering doesn't always come as punishment. Sometimes it comes to teach, to refine, or for reasons a person simply isn't able to see. He pointed up at the darkening sky. He told Job that even the weather itself moved by God's command. The thunder, the clouds, and the lightning all moved in ways no human being could predict. It was Elihu's words that finally quieted the argument and set the stage for what happened next. While Elihu was still speaking, the sky above Job began to change. Dark clouds rolled in fast from the horizon, blotting out what little light was left in the day. The wind picked up sharply, pulling at the ashes around Job and stinging his open sores. Thunder started rumbling somewhere in the distance, growing louder with every passing minute. It was a kind of fear they didn't know how to explain. Job, still sitting outside in the ashes of his ruined life, watched the storm build around him without moving. Then, out of the center of that storm, a voice spoke directly to Job. It came not through a messenger, not through a dream, but from inside the whirlwind itself. This was God, answering Job face to face for the first time in the entire story. The voice did not answer Job's question about why he was suffering. Instead, it asked Job a long series of questions of its own. "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?" the voice asked. "Tell me, if you understand so much." God asked Job whether he had ever once commanded the sunrise. God asked whether he had ever walked across the floor of the ocean or understood where snow and hail are stored before they fall. God asked whether Job had ever climbed the cliffs where wild mountain goats give birth. He asked whether Job had ever watched over the eagle's nest, built high on a rock ledge where no man could reach it. God described the wild donkey that no man can tame and put to work. He described the ostrich, which can outrun a horse, despite having no wisdom of its own to guide it. God asked Job whether he had given the war horse its strength. This was the animal that runs toward battle without fear, laughing at the sound of clashing swords. Then God described two massive, terrifying creatures in detail. There was Behemoth, a beast of overwhelming strength that no man could capture or control. And there was Leviathan, a fearsome creature of the deep, so powerful that no weapon made by human hands could wound it. God's point wasn't to humiliate Job for no reason. It was to show him that the entire natural world runs on a wisdom and power far beyond human understanding. If Job couldn't even explain how the world around him worked, he had no real footing to judge how God was running it. Question after question came out of the whirlwind, and Job had an answer for none of them. He had spent weeks demanding that God explain the reasons behind his suffering. Now God was the one asking the questions. They were about creation, about the animals of the wild, and about the very structure of the world. Job lived inside that world every day without understanding it. Job listened to all of it without interrupting, and when the voice finally paused, Job gave his answer. He didn't argue back, and he didn't demand an explanation anymore. Instead, he said, "I know that you can do all things, and that no plan of yours can ever be stopped. I spoke about things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. I had heard about you before with my own ears, but now my own eyes have seen you. So I take back everything I said, and I repent, sitting here in dust and ashes." Job wasn't repenting over secret sin. He was not the sinner his friends had accused him of being. He was repenting because he finally understood something important. He had spent weeks demanding answers from someone whose wisdom was too vast for him to question in the first place. God then turned his attention to Job's three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. He told them plainly that he was angry with them because, unlike Job, they had not spoken the truth about him. Their entire argument that suffering always proves hidden sin was wrong from the start. God instructed them to offer a sacrifice. He told them that Job himself would pray on their behalf so that they would not be punished for the mistake they had made. The very man his three friends had spent chapters accusing was the same man God chose to intercede for them. After Job prayed for his friends, everything about his life began to change. The Bible says the Lord restored Job's fortunes and gave him twice as much as he had owned. Before any of this happened, his herds came back doubled in size, 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 oxen, and 1,000 donkeys. That was more than he had ever owned in his life. His brothers, sisters, and old friends came back to visit him at his house, comforting him over everything he had suffered. Each visitor arrived with a gift, a piece of silver and a gold ring. These were small tokens that together helped rebuild the fortune raiders, and fire and storms had wiped out in a single afternoon years earlier. The house that had once collapsed under a windstorm was gone. A new one now stood full of noise again, footsteps, laughter, and the sound of a family Job once thought he'd never have again. Job had 10 more children, 7 sons and 3 daughters. His 3 daughters, named Jemima, Keziah, and Karen Hapuch, grew up to become known as the most beautiful women in the entire land. Job gave all 3 of his daughters an inheritance alongside their brothers, which was unusual for that time and place. But Job had learned, through everything he had lost, exactly how much his family was worth to him. Job went on to live another 140 years after all of this. He lived long enough to see 4 generations of his own family grow up around him. He died an old man who had lived a full life. But he carried the memory of the 10 children he lost in that windstorm for the rest of his years. He held his new family close, even as he remembered the one he'd lost.
These videos takes hours and hours to make. Please like and subscribe and comment which country you are watching this from.